But first, strangely enough, we're going to talk about atheists in the Defence Forces. And let me talk to John Hamill. John, of the Atheist Society, you've got an axe to grind here, I suspect, do you?
Yes, indeed, and specifically, so it comes from a Freedom of Information request that Atheist Ireland submitted to the Defence Forces. And what we've discovered is that, in contrast to all other parts of the public sector, when the Defence Forces want to hire a chaplain, they essentially just hand the cash over to the bishop and let the bishop decide who should be chaplain. So anywhere else, for example, in third level institutes who hire chaplains, they will advertise the role. People of all faiths and none can apply, and the best candidate for the job is accepted. But what the Defence Forces do is they spend roughly €1 million per year on military chaplains, and they just allow bishops to appoint those roles. So very quickly, there's three main problems with that. The first is the one that I've mentioned, that non-religious chaplains can't apply. The second is that there's a provision in our constitution that says the state shall not endow any religion, and handing over €1 million worth of salary to the bishop seems like a very clear example of endowing a religion. But the main problem is that it's really hugely disrespectful to soldiers in our defence forces who are non-religious. It's often said by military chaplains that there are no atheists in foxholes, and this is an allusion to the idea that a soldier will always have a come-to-Jesus moment if they're in harm's way. But in fact, it's just not true. There are many atheists who have served heroically in the military, and in fact, if you ask those people, what they'll tell you is that there are many more atheists in foxholes than there are chaplains in foxholes.
Right. But you just think of a chaplain as being religious. Is it not a contradiction in terms to have an atheist chaplain?
Not at all. There are many atheist chaplains in militaries across the world. When we wrote to the minister about this recently, we cited some comments from the head of all of the chaplains in the Dutch army, who is an atheist, and he described how they carry out all of the same functions as their Christian colleagues for their soldiers and the friends and family of their soldiers. So if you look at the kind of issues that soldiers are going to deal with, it's going to be kind of complicated questions about ethics and morality. It might be bereavement and how to deal with the mortality of themselves and their colleagues. And there's a long tradition of secular philosophy on these issues that stands alongside.
But probably, I'm thinking of James Stevens or Stevens Barracks in Kilkenny.
Uh-huh.
Now, I might be wrong, but I'm presuming that the majority of the soldiers there are probably Catholic. And if they,
Sure.
How would they feel about having an atheist chaplain?
Well, there are 18 chaplains in the Defence Forces at the minute. One is Church of Ireland and the other 17 are Roman Catholic. And if you compare that to the census, more than 10% of the population in Ireland is non-religious. So by rights, if you like, there should be 2 at least non-religious chaplains in the Defence Forces.
But is there only one chaplain for one barracks?
No, I think the chaplains are spread around, and some of them are stationed overseas also, depending on how they are needed. But as you'd say, I'm not at all opposed to Roman Catholic priests being military chaplains. In fact, if a role was advertised and a Roman Catholic priest happened to be the best candidate for the job, I would object.
You'd be happy enough.
So what? Get the job.
Finally, John, what kind of response have you had, if any, from people serving in the Defence Forces themselves?
One of the responses has highlighted another issue, which is the salaries of the chaplains. So whoever's lobbying on behalf of the church is getting a much more sympathetic hearing from the Department of Defence than whoever's lobbying on behalf of the soldiers. So if you carry a Bible into a church in the Defence Forces, you will be paid more than double than a man who carries a rifle into a foxhole.
Is that right? The chaplains get paid double?
Chaplains get paid more than double from what a private does. Even if you are promoted to a captain or a lieutenant, the lowest paid chaplain in the Defence Forces will still get paid more than a captain or a lieutenant. If you want to get paid more than a chaplain in the Defence Forces, you have to be promoted to a colonel to get paid more than a chaplain. So as I say, there's a long tradition in our state of being excessively deferential to the Roman Catholic Church. And what the Defence Force is doing is not only paying chaplains absolutely amazing salaries when you compare them to the soldiers who are putting their lives at risk, but they are handing those salaries over to bishops. So unlike any other part of the public service where people have to apply for a job so that the person who gets the job is the best candidate to serve the needs of the soldiers, in this case, those enormous salaries are just handed straight to the bishop.
Okay.
And that's not consistent with the Employment Equality Act, and it's not consistent with the Constitution.
Okay, listen, interesting stuff, John. Thanks very much for joining us. I don't know whether they were listening down in the barracks or not, but I'm sure they'd have a view. Thanks very much for joining us. Take care.
All the best.
Thank you. That's John Hamill there of Atheist Ireland, who doesn't want all the money for chaplains to be handed over to the bishops. We'll take a break.